This is not a video about a country. It is a video about a pattern that repeats across history, in empires, in revolutions, in regimes that once seemed unshakable. We are here to examine a fundamental question. Why do some systems not fall because they are attacked from the outside, but because something inside them quietly breaks? And more importantly, what happens in the final moments before collapse? What changes inside the minds of those who hold power when loyalty is no longer stronger than survival? Let's begin with a simple but uncomfortable premise. A system does not collapse when it is defeated. It collapses when it is no longer worth maintaining. That is the turning point. Not defeat, but disintegration of purpose. To understand this, let's examine a concrete structure, the internal dynamics of elite power. Organizations such as Iran's Revolutionary Guard, not as a military force, but as a psychological system, because that is what it truly is. Condition 1. When money divides loyalty. These organizations are not just ideological. They are economic ecosystems. They control industries, contracts, resources, and when interests collide, when access to wealth becomes unequal, when corruption turns into competition, loyalty begins to erode. Because when survival is tied to resources, and resources become unstable, loyalty becomes negotiable. Condition 2. When leadership weakens. Strong systems often depend on a single stabilizing force, authority. But authority is fragile. The death of a leader, the erosion of legitimacy, the uncertainty of succession. These are not political events. They are psychological fractures. Because once authority is questioned, competition replaces obedience. And when competition begins, unity ends. Condition 3. When reality contradicts belief. Hardline systems sustain themselves through success. Victory reinforces ideology. But repeated failure creates cognitive dissonance, strategic errors, rising casualties, visible setbacks. These introduce a dangerous question. What if we are wrong? And once that question enters the system, it spreads. Condition 4. When society re-enters the system. Even the most ideological soldier is still human. They have families, children, connections to society. And when economic hardship reaches their homes, when younger generations think differently, when the social mood shifts, internal loyalty begins to crack because identity expands beyond the system. Condition 5. When survival overrides loyalty. This is the most powerful trigger. The moment an individual believes, if this system continues, I may not survive, everything changes. Loyalty shifts to self-preservation. Collective identity collapses into individual choice. And at that moment, the system begins to fracture from within. So if we compress everything into one sentence, it is this. A regime does not fall when it is attacked. It falls when people inside it no longer see a reason to protect it. Now let's go deeper. Why do some leaders move toward authoritarian alignment in the first place? This is often misunderstood as ideology. It is not. It is strategy. A survival strategy. Stage 1. The external enemy. Leaders construct an external threat, not primarily for foreign policy, but for internal control. Because the stronger the perceived enemy, the easier it becomes to redefine dissent as betrayal. Criticism becomes treason. Opposition becomes disloyalty. Fear becomes governance. Stage 2. The attraction of control. At this point, leaders begin to observe systems that offer stability through control. Highly centralized models, low tolerance for dissent, rapid decision-making. These systems are not attractive because of ideology, but because they offer predictability. And in unstable environments, predictability is power. Stage 3. Gradual internal transformation. At first, it is a tactical choice. Then it becomes justification. And eventually, belief. The leader no longer uses power as a tool. Power becomes truth itself. Now here is the critical question. How do societies respond to this? Not emotionally. Structural. The answer lies in 3 actions. Maintain diversity of information, so no single narrative dominates reality. Preserve institutional checks, judiciary, media, elections. Break collective silence, because silence stabilizes illusion. What must be resisted is not just policy, but framing. The equation of external threat, internal control. The idea that criticism, betrayal, the forced choice between security and freedom, these are not realities. They are constructs. Now, let's confront a harder truth. What happens at the edge of collapse? Not structurally, but psychologically. At that point, power is no longer about control. It becomes survival. For those inside the system, the logic shifts. Outside power, death. Inside power, risk, but possibility. So leadership is no longer a privilege. It is the last position of survival. This creates a condition known as bounded fatalism. There is no safe option, only different forms of danger. And in such systems, something remarkable happens. Fear does not disappear, but it stops influencing behavior. Why? Because ideology reframes death. The organization suppresses fear expression, and power becomes the only path to survival. So individuals are not fearless. They are trapped. At the collective level, another force takes over. Narrative. The group story becomes stronger than individual emotion. Martyrdom becomes honor. Retreat becomes betrayal. And the system creates a structure where even fear cannot justify withdrawal. At this point, we are no longer observing politics. We are observing something closer to what ancient philosophy described as a state between worlds, a threshold. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there is a concept known as the bardo, a transitional state between death and rebirth, a moment where reality dissolves and the mind confronts its own projections. If we translate this into political terms, a collapsing regime enters a collective bardo, not between life and death, but between existence and disappearance. And in that moment, a choice emerges to confront reality or to cling to illusion. Here is the paradox. In politics, choosing reality can be more dangerous than choosing illusion, because letting go of power may not mean defeat. It may mean death. And that is why systems escalate, why leaders harden, why wars continue beyond rational limits. Because at that point, war is no longer strategic. It becomes psychological, moral, perceptual. So now we arrive at the final question. When a system approaches collapse, what choice does it make? History suggests two paths: facing reality and stepping down, or reinforcing illusion and pushing forward. And more often than we would like to admit, systems choose illusion. Because fear does not always lead to retreat. Sometimes it leads to escalation. So remember this: authoritarian systems are not sustained by strength. They are sustained by a collective compromise with fear. And freedom? Freedom is not given. It is constructed by individuals who choose to see clearly and speak when silence would be easier. The first act is simple: to see. The second, to speak. If this analysis expanded your perspective, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing, because the continuation of this conversation depends on people who are willing to confront reality, even when it is uncomfortable.